I think most everybody in here probably knows this already, but I'll do just a very brief introduction of who we are. So Model Technology Solutions was founded in 2014 by a set of engineers. Some came from the private sector, corporate America, which was me, and some of the other partners came from the consulting side. 2014, we kind of all got together and talked about our experiences with consulting companies and decided that we thought we could do something a little bit better than what we've experienced. So we have two major practices, which is our project delivery. So that's your standard statement of work, time and materials. And then we have a unified endpoint as a service, which is a extension to your IT team. So really, our mission is, why we founded this company was to be a delivery-focused organization, right? There's so many organizations out there that are just sales-focused, right? Yes, we will do that. Whatever you ask, we can do it. We took a very dramatically different approach, and that was we stick to what we do and we do it very well, so that we can help our clients become their infrastructure heroes. So the agenda, real quick, we're going to be talking about some blockers to infrastructure automation and around security, specifically software updates, and then account and data protection. Windows 10, so in-place upgrades from legacy OS and the ongoing servicing, as well as talking a little bit about dynamic deployments to make that process easier and better. And then the other piece we're going to talk about is OSD Insights. So if I were to throw the question out there today, who can go very easily today and find out when machines were built, how they were built, where they were built, what the configuration looked like, or do a historical lookup of a machine that's been built to see how many times it's been built or rebuilt? That is very hard data to try to glean out of ConfigMan. It's all there, but it'd take a long time to figure out how to pull all of that data out in a useful manner. So OSD Insights is a product that we are developing actively and that we use to start providing more insights into how your operating system deployment platform is being used. And then at the very end, we're going to talk a little bit about modern management. So is anybody in here doing modern management today? Does anybody not know what modern management means? That's probably a buzzword that has been going around for a while. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more about the approach from traditional management to modern management, specifically around the ever-increasing remote workforce. And at the end, I'm going to introduce one of our clients who's actually taken a dive into some of the modern management stuff to give us a little bit of his experience so far. Okay, so security, right? Specifically patching. Who loves doing patching every month? Anyone? Not one hand, that's shocking. It's something that's necessary and nobody likes to do it. So the challenge is, right, we have our waves each month. So we have to set up tests, pilot, prod. Hopefully you're doing something along those lines to make sure you're testing your patches. We try to use maintenance windows to potentially control when devices are going to patch and when they're going to reboot. Using our ADRs, we can introduce some automation. So ADRs actually do a lot of the heavy lifting of the initial monthly process, which is good. And then we have post-deployment compliance. So I have yet to work in any organization when you deploy patches that every patch installs on every machine successfully. And you, what's that? Are you recording? I am, yes. So impact, server patching. That's generally even more fun than workstation patching because we generally have a group of people who are owners of the applications on those servers, right, that may have to do pre-checks or post-checks. So that's generally a lot of man hours spent after patching servers, making sure everything is back up, right? Is my IAS back up and running? Is my SQL Server processes back up and running after patching, right? So a lot of post-deployment checks that have to go into that. And of course, troubleshooting failed deployments, which is always a monthly thing, unfortunately. And then finally, you have to report, right? So our security departments are getting more and more leverage within organizations these days, right? Pushing for security and compliance. We're seeing a big ramp up in the security teams really kind of bogging down on the patch compliancy. John can probably attest to that. In the workstations, again, we have the same process. Now, we don't generally have to have people running around making sure that Outlook is back up and running and things like that. Workstations are a little bit more simplified from that perspective. But we do have to start troubleshooting failed deployments, right, and also do compliance reporting. So compliancy is the big keyword here, right? Our security teams are on the infrastructure team to make sure that we are being compliant, because there's a lot of nasty things that have come out from malware to ransomware, everything else, right? It's a major threat that's constantly being combated. A lot of the troubleshooting efforts are around disk space, not enough disk space, CBS store corruption, that's always a fun one, or just broken config manager clients that aren't properly managing the Windows Update agent, getting its software. And a lot of times what I see, and I can tell you I was guilty of this early in my IT career, that patch management on the workstations tends to be a set and forget. Right? Servers have a lot more visibility, but a lot of times people just deploy patches each month and move on. Next month they deploy patches and move on because they have 30 other things that they have to get done, right? They don't have the time to sit and focus on remediating dozens or even hundreds of machines that are having problems. So how do we optimize this process? PowerShell is a very first good line of defense. So if you're not using PowerShell today, which I think most people in this day and age are, you should get very familiar with it, because it can do things, it basically can do just about anything you can conceive, to the point of a couple of years ago, one of our partners actually wrote a Space Invaders game purely in PowerShell, just to demonstrate the fact that you can do just about anything you want to do in PowerShell. So it's a very, very powerful tool. Obviously, it integrates very nicely with Windows and SCCM, so you could do a lot of good scripting in that. Or, instead of writing all that yourself, we actually have a product, the Model APS, or the Automated Patching System, that is 90% PowerShell driven with a database backend that is a full automated end-to-end server patching solution. So things that we can do, right, is we define our owners and our matrix, who owns what servers, who needs to be notified in the event the servers are successfully patched, or there's a problem, or they're compliant, whatever the case may be. We map all of that out with you so that when it comes time for the automation to run, it knows who to contact and who the owners are in the events of success and failures. In addition, this product can do pre and post health checks. So we were talking about one of the big man hours spent in server patching is the server owners going back and verifying all the services are back up, right? We can do that now by defining that in the automated patch solution. We can define this server is a web server and it has these things that need to be up and running, and we can put automation into the process that says when it's done patching, verify those services are running. And if those services are not running for it, then we can notify the server owners. Monitoring through the whole process, right? It's all database driven, PowerShell driven, and then again, alerting and notifications throughout the process. So if you're interested in hearing more about APS or seeing a demo, you can ping myself or Steve or Jason here to get a little bit more deep dive into what that is. The other thing, this is a little bit of self-promotion here, but our unified endpoint management as a service, we manage patch processes each month for several of our clients, mostly on the workstation side and in addition to some server-side management. So with our services, right, we're a team of engineers that have been doing this for a very long time. So we try to take that off of your plate, manage the end-to-end process, right? And we are the guys that can focus on remediation and compliance while you guys are getting projects thrown at you from the business. Right? So it's another way to kind of offset and remove some of that daily or monthly grind of software update management. So the ultimate goal there, right, is to be secure and compliant. That's what our security teams, and I mean, we want that too, but our security teams are making sure we want that. So lots of ways to take that and move that into a scenario where very little requirement for you, but very high compliance reporting. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about account protection. This is an interesting one, and I think as we go through some of this, we're going to be throwing out some controversial concepts. So I'm not promoting or not promoting these concepts. I just want to throw them out there. So password practices. Common password policy. This is every organization I've ever worked in, and most likely is how you guys manage passwords or something very similar, which is we require complex passwords. We require users to change those passwords every 30, 60, 90 days, whatever your policy is. We say you can't use the previous 5 is generally an average. So now as an end user, I've got to make up 6 passwords that I'm going to use in a rotation, right? If I want my credentials to be cached in that scenario, I have to change my password while I'm on the corporate network. Otherwise, I get out of sync, and now I'm logging into Outlook with a different password than I am into Windows, and that's always a fun challenge. And lastly, a lot of this leads to people writing their password rotation down on a Post-it note and sticking it under their keyboard, or sometimes even as brazen as putting it right there on their monitor. So the moral of this process is we've, as IT, have been trying to see how can we try to mitigate people's passwords and accounts from being compromised. And really what we've done is we've created a scenario that's complex that can actually make it less secure for those very reasons where people are writing their passwords down and sticking them all over the place because they can't use a common passphrase that they know and they have to change it constantly. So it becomes a very complex. Now, so this guy could either be one of our end users, right? He's frustrated because, oh, it's time to change my password again. And he's going to try several things and not meet the complexity requirements for 3 or 4 tries, things like that. It's going to be very frustrated. That could also be an IT admin, right? Because we're getting the calls constantly in the service desks about passwords. Right? I would venture to say, at least in the organizations I've worked with, password reset requests make up the majority of the service desk calls. Right? So you've created what you think is a secure process, but it becomes very frustrating to an end user and for the IT department. So again, what is our impact? Well, frustrated users generally translates into Post-it notes. Having a password in general, right, is subject to somebody's shoulder surfing you and taking your password from that and going to another machine in your network and logging in as you. With this general traditional way of managing accounts and passwords, we don't really have a way to alert on my account was just logged in Vietnam for some reason, right? That's suspicious. I'm not in Vietnam. Phishing attacks. This is a very prominent way this day and age to get users to expose their account, right? People are getting very good at crafting these phishing emails that look very legitimate and convincing people to click in and put their information in, which is definitely a challenge. And then of course we have the good old brute force attacks, right? If somebody knows your ID, they can try to go down the path of brute force cracking your password. So optimization, we're going to talk about a couple of different things here, but I think one of the very first lines of defense is multi-factor authentication. Almost every service I use now outside of work is 2-factor authentication enabled. Sometimes it's required, but many organizations are at least even offering it as an option to be more secure. Makes a lot of sense when you think about it, right? Because even if you have my username and password, if I've got to authenticate in a second factor, very little chance that you're going to be able to spoof that and crack my account. So specifically in multi-factor authentication, Azure MFA. So if you guys are licensed for enterprise mobility and security or Azure Active Directory Premium specifically, you own Azure MFA. That can be implemented in the cloud, it can be implemented on-prem, or it can be both. It can do more than just login, Windows login multi-factor authentication. It can secure other services and stuff on-prem with 2-factor authentication. Is anybody using Azure MFA today? So we got 4. Cool. That's good. And your experience so far?
Great.
Yeah, you're eyeballing me.
Works fine online.
Okay. Yeah, we'll read between the lines on that one. Thank you.
Using conditional access.
Which is the next bullet point, conditional access, right? So you can also use conditional access to enforce MFA enrollment as well as a number of other things that we'll touch on briefly a little bit later. The ability to monitor and audit suspicious logins is critical this day and age. Right? So I've had a password of mine, an account of mine that recently got compromised from some data breach. And almost every service I use that account on, I started getting email notifications, right? I got an Uber notification, somebody logged in Vietnam on my Uber account, right? That sort of thing. Being able to do that and be able to see that in your login process is very key to understanding how your accounts are being used, right? So MFA gives you another level of protection there in that process. So here's where we're going to talk a little bit about the controversial discussion that's being had in many circles. So rethinking password policies. When I talked about the standard password complexity requirements, reuse, unable to reuse, change every so often, is that how you guys are all set up in your organizations today? Pretty common, right? So I'm going to put up a quote here. This is from, let me scroll down to get this guy's name. So Aaron Margosis, he's a principal consultant in the Microsoft public sector that specializes in Windows platforms, focus on security, least privilege, and compatibility in lockdown environments. So I'll let you read the quote, but in effect, it's, if we're taking the modern approach to account management, right? We're doing things like blocking known bad IP ranges. We're implementing multi-factor authentication, right? And then in the next bullet, we're going to talk about Windows Hello. If we take all of that and we combine that, really what value are we gaining out of users having to change their password all the time? And hopefully the next slide will kind of lead into some of the reason behind that. So Windows Hello. Is anybody using Windows Hello today in their organizations for their end users? No one. Wow. Okay. Well, hopefully we're going to talk a little bit about today, at least maybe spark your ability to go back and see, is Windows Hello something that you guys want to implement in your organization? There's a lot of really good features about this, right? So Windows Hello, if you're not familiar, is native to Windows 10, uses the PIN or biometric login process instead of your traditional username and password. Now you still have a password, right? But when you actually go to log in, you're going to use either the biometrics or the PIN, so your password is not transmitted across the wire. That biometric fingerprint or facial recognition or your PIN code that you create for that login process is tied specifically to that device. Right? I can't take somebody's PIN and go to any other device in my organization and log in. We can integrate Windows Hello with multi-factor authentication as well. Right? So we kind of have a two-factor authentication there where we have an account, and now we have a fingerprint or a facial recognition or a PIN as a second level of authentication, but we can add MFA on top of that as well to make it even more secure. So let's talk a little bit about why would I want to use PINs and why would I want to use Windows Hello. So Windows Hello effectively addresses the following password problems that we see. One, strong passwords, difficult to remember, translates into post-it notes. Somebody breaches the server, right? It can expose those network credentials. In a traditional login process, your password is transmitted to the authentication server over the wire. So it's subject to somebody internal on your network sniffing the wire and trying to take your password. In a Windows Hello scenario, your PIN is local to the device. It's not transmitted anywhere, right? When a PIN is created, it establishes a trust relationship with the identity provider, creates an asymmetric key pair, and is used for authentication. So when you log in with your PIN or your biometrics, it actually just unlocks the authentication key to sign the request, and that's what's sent to the authentication server. Right? So you're protecting your username and password on that device because you're never sending it across the wire for authentication. Significant increase in security in that manner. Right? So not only do you get better security, but now you've also got a very friendly login process. Right? So if I've got all of this stuff in play, you got to start thinking or asking yourself, do I need all those complex password requirements if I've put all of this stuff in front of it? So end users, right? So I use Windows Hello, and I couldn't imagine having to go back because it's just so convenient. I can put my finger on the fingerprint reader and instantly log in. So highly encourage you guys to read up on Windows Hello and see how and where it can fit in your organization, because it is really powerful stuff when properly implemented and can really make your end users experience much better and maybe get out of the business of keeping post-it notes to log in. Did you have a question?
Yeah, does that completely get around past the hash because you're not actually transmitting anything?
Correct. If somebody already has it, right, then and they're taking your authentication from a server they've compromised, that doesn't get around that, right? But purely the login process into your device prevents your password from being transmitted over the wire to the authentication server, right? So it's tied to the device itself. So I don't have to change my password because I'm not using my password to log in, right? My password is what it is. I'm using Windows Hello and my PIN and biometrics to do my login.
So it's signing something and then sending that.
Yeah, but even
Correct.
if you took those credentials to another device, it's not going to authenticate you to that device, right? Because it's on the VPN chip.
Right, so think about it, I still have a username and password. If somebody's still got a hold of my username and password, I've got MFA requirements on, or I've got Windows Hello requirements turned on in my group policy. I go sit down to another machine, it's going to try to force me to enroll, and it's going to make me use my MFA to do that login. Right? So with Azure MFA specifically, I have the ability to go report on failed login attempts and things like that. Right? I can see if somebody's taken my user account and trying to log into other devices with it unsuccessfully. So really, really powerful stuff that a lot of people are not using because I think there's a lot of, at least from the various organizations I've talked to, there's a lot of confusion around the security process here. Right? People are like, well, why do I want to use a PIN? Somebody can guess a PIN, right? If I'm doing a 4-digit PIN, that doesn't sound more secure to me. But when you think about the whole process and how it works together, it is actually a very, very secure process. Specifically because I can't take that PIN, even if somebody grabbed it, and go to any other device. They would have to steal my device. They would have to use my PIN code to log in, and then they would have to get multi-factor authentication request to commit that, right? So very powerful stuff. So definitely encourage everybody to start really looking into that. The controversy is you're going to go to your security team and say, hey, we want to remove all of our password policies. They're probably going to flip their lid immediately until you maybe start having a deeper conversation about it.
But can you really remove all your password policies? Because if you have a new device,
Mm-hmm.
then you have to set up the connection, say, between my new Outlook client and the Exchange server, wherever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to do the same thing for OneDrive, et cetera, et cetera. So at some point, I'm typing in I have to have a password to establish that connection.
When you
Or-
log into
or
your
I have
device.
a device and I'm just going to use some strange browser.
Yeah, the first time you log into your device, right, you're going to have to use your password to log in because that's the only thing it knows at that point. But you can use group policy to say on login and force Windows Hello enrollment, basically, right? Force a PIN creation. If it's biometrics, you can force that. From that point on, right, that credential never leaves your device.
Right. So you still have a little hole there that's one time set up for a device or something.
Yeah.
Somebody else got your password, they can set up their device, their burner phone or whatever.
Yeah. Okay. All right, any other questions around Windows Hello? Okay, we'll move along then. We do it on time. Okay, the next piece is app and data protection. So the challenges that we have, right, today in most scenarios we have file servers sitting on the network with more and more and more storage being added to it every year because the file sizes continue to grow. We might be using offline file sync, which if anybody has used that, that presents its own fun. File types and group policies to determine whether I'm a slow connection or a fast connection can be very frustrating. Roaming, right? So if I'm here in St. Louis and my home drive is on a file server here in St. Louis and then I have to go to Asia for some reason, the experience can be very poor for that user if they're having to go across a very slow WAN link back to get to their home drive. Especially if you're doing folder redirection, that can be very challenging. And then of course, everybody's favorite when they go to visit a user to resolve something, right? They've got all of their documents just splattered all over the desktop, right? Which may or may not be redirected. So the impact there is potentially data volatility, right? Do I know where users are saving data? Is it safe in the event that that data or that machine crashes? Managing now ACLs that can grow more and more complex on my file servers. I can access that, right? If I don't have this other Windows Hello and stuff set up, and I get your password, I can get to that content from anywhere, including an untrusted device. And it's expensive. Right? Maintaining the life cycle of a file server that contains terabytes of data can get very expensive because you have to patch that machine, right? You have to keep up with it. You have to do the maintenance on it. You have to have somebody in your operations team making sure they're keeping that up to date, right? And we're always expanding additional storage because we're always running out. So there's cost there as well. And then ransomware, right? So if my data is on the drive and it's not properly backed up, right? So if I'm doing offline file sync, I might not be able to sync data that I'm working on locally until I connect to a VPN and then hope that the connection is good enough to where it syncs my data back. Ransomware has been as everybody I'm sure has heard, has been a pretty hot topic for the last few years. Seems to be the way that most hackers want to go now, because if they get you in the right spot, you have no choice but to pay them, right, to get your data back. So it's ingenious from a very poor point of view, but we have to figure out ways to protect ourselves from ransomware. First line of defense in that is, in my opinion, and a lot of people are using it, is OneDrive for Business. Is anybody not using Office 365 in here? So everybody owns OneDrive for Business. And if I'm not mistaken, Rick, you can probably correct me if I'm wrong, but you get a terabyte of home drive space per user with Office 365 for your OneDrive for Business.
You can get more than that if you choose.
Yeah, that just comes standard with your licensing, 1 terabyte. So think about how many users you have in your organization times 1 terabyte times the cost of storage and upkeep of file servers. Right? That's a significant amount of money. OneDrive for Business, you already own it. Right? You can do things like folder redirection. So take my laptop, for example. We use OneDrive for Business. All of my main folders that I care about, desktop, pictures, documents, videos, basically everything but downloads, which I don't want to back up, are redirected into my OneDrive for Business folder, and those are all synced into my OneDrive account. Right? And the beauty of that is I can sync anywhere I get on the internet. I don't have to have a VPN connection to get back to a file server and then hope the things sync before I get off. Right? The sync engine in OneDrive for Business is very, very good, and you can control bandwidth and things like that through policies. I can also apply conditional access policies to access my data. Right? And a traditional file server, I'm not sure there's a way, that maybe there's third-party utilities, but natively I can't do a conditional access to my home drive in a traditional file server. But with OneDrive for Business, I can make sure that whoever's accessing that data is on a device that meets the compliancy of my organization. And then data loss prevention, right? So that's huge in many organizations, probably in most organizations. Right? Being able to identify or block things like documents that contain social security numbers. Right? I can't really do that today in a traditional file server manner unless I implement some third-party solution. That's built into the Office 365 platform to where I can apply data loss prevention policies to my OneDrive for Business. And probably most of us would agree that no infrastructure to maintain is a beautiful thing, right? We let Microsoft maintain that in Azure. So, other than OneDrive for Business, which, is anybody doing OneDrive for Business folder redirection and offline sync? Awesome. Rick, you're on it. So the other piece is BitLocker, or really encryption, right? BitLocker, if you own Windows 10 Pro or Enterprise, it's built into the operating system and you're free to use it. MBAM, or the Microsoft BitLocker Administration and Management, I think is what that stands for, is a really nice solution for managing BitLocker. That is actually coming to SCCM if you haven't heard yet. So in the next tech preview, I believe they're actually integrating MBAM so that you can fully manage your BitLocker all from within your SCCM console, which is nice. But the key there is protecting my data at rest. So if somebody does get a hold of my device, they can't pop my hard drive out, go stick it in another device and gain access to everything that I've synced locally in my OneDrive. So if it's not BitLocker, some sort of encryption. For IT guys, we always want to make sure whatever that encryption is has an API or some way to interface with it in a scripted manner. So for things like Windows 10, we can deal with it. Yes, sir?
The other nice thing about OneDrive for Business versus your file shares, your individual file shares, is once the person leaves the company, Microsoft cleans up for you. As opposed to, we all hate deleting stuff. We give it to the manager, hey, you have 90 days to take this thing, but then they never get to it. So we end up with these things all over the place.
Yeah. And if you have like MFA enabled as well, right? I can go to any browser, I can get to my OneDrive stuff. If I don't have my computer, I can get to it, secured with an MFA authentication, and all my data is available anywhere I go that I can get on the internet. And you own it. That's the beauty of it, is if you're Office 365, you own that. Conditional access, we talked a little bit about. I'll just kind of let you read that if you can. I know it's probably a little small, but I know you guys are using conditional access, right? Is anybody else using conditional access in their environment today? No. Okay. It's a great way to make sure that untrusted devices or insecure devices do not come onto your network and access the kind of content that can make them dangerous, right? So all of the cloud Office 365 stuff, you can put conditional access on. Windows 10, you can put conditional access on to access certain services, or even the login process, right? We can make sure that your device, we define what a compliant device for my organization looks like, and your device has to meet those compliance requirements before I allow you to access things like your email, right? Your OneDrive for Business, SharePoint, things like that. Really, really powerful stuff. So conditional access, make sure our device is compliant. Right, with conditional access, we can block logins from untrusted IPs. Right, we can integrate with multi-factor authentication or have these conditional access require MFA enrollment. Things like making sure your device is managed by Intune if you're an Intune shop. Right, you can put a conditional access policy that says you don't get access to anything until your device is enrolled, and I've applied my security policies, my settings, my applications to your device. So the hero moment there is protecting and securing your company data. Right? So these tools really allow you to enhance the security, which everybody wants, right? But making it a more user-friendly experience. Right? How many people that use file servers and folder redirections do their users love that technology? It's very, very rare, because it definitely comes with its own its own issues. So, any other questions about that? I feel like we're going way too fast here. No questions? Okay. Just start talking randomly to fill time. I like it. All right, Windows 10, in-place upgrades and continuous servicing. I gotta imagine everybody in here is on their way to Windows 10 by now. Is anybody fully Windows 10 yet? No. So we all know Windows 7 end of life next year. We all know we have to get to Windows 10, and we probably all know what Windows as a service means, but we'll just recap it here for good measure, right? With Windows 10, we get 2 releases a year. They're currently called semi-annual release. Microsoft has changed the names of this process several times since Windows 10 was introduced, but I'm hopeful that they'll stick with semi-annual release at this point. So basically a spring and a fall release every year. Spring releases are always 18-month support cycle. So if you deploy 1903, for example, you're on an 18-month track to get off of 1903 before it's out of support. Fall support lifecycle, so the second release of the year, is now 30 months support lifecycle. Note that that is Enterprise Edition only. I actually didn't know that until recently, that if you're using Windows 10 Pro, your support lifecycle is always 18 months, period, no matter what release. So you only get the 30-month lifecycle support when you move to the Enterprise SKU.
Does that mean that they'll stop releasing patches, or is it just a empty threat that you're supporting?
I just know it's supported for 18 months is the equation. So I don't know if there's something built into the updates to say I'm not going to apply to you anymore because you're Pro. I don't know what the implications there are. I just know that is Microsoft's official statement. So,
Roger.
yep. So that's interesting. I did not know that. New features in addition to security, right? New features are being added with each new release as well. And then we have our various management capabilities for Windows as a service, right? We can do it traditionally via Config Man. Is everybody a Config Man shop? Are you guys a Config Man shop? No, okay. So you can continue to manage Windows 10 like you always have with Windows 7 or XP before it, or when everybody went to Windows 8, right? No. So traditional management with SCCM. But Windows 10 was really built from the ground up to be the transition operating system into a monitored management workload. So it has an MDM sub system in it that allows it to be managed very similar to a mobile device. So the goal is to get an operating system that can be managed from anywhere. They did some of that in Windows 8.1, but we all know nobody really got aggressive with 8.1 rollouts. But vastly improved in the Windows 10 experience. So in addition to traditional management, right, you can also do co-management. So you can use your Azure Active Directory presence with Intune and SCCM to manage the devices on-prem with SCCM. I go off the network, I can be managed via Intune. You can also do just pure cloud management, right? If you don't have SCCM infrastructure, you can manage Windows 10 fully with just Intune and Azure Active Directory. And then there's some light management capabilities. If you don't own Intune and you don't own Config Man, but you have Office 365, you can do some light management of your Windows 10 devices, things around like Exchange policies and things like that. It's not very robust, but you have some capability there. So some of the challenges that I've seen over the last several years with implementing Windows 10 into an environment for in-place upgrades and things like that, from legacy operating systems to 10, but also from older 10 builds to newer 10 builds. Security software. So if anybody has rolled out Windows 10 that had McAfee, Trend, Norton, if that's even a thing anymore, so I can tell you McAfee specifically, on 2 occasions we've had this where the application works fine on the version of Windows 10 that we're going to, but if it's installed on the existing operating system, it breaks the upgrade. So we had to use task sequences to get around that, to remove McAfee, do the upgrade, put McAfee back on. If you actually go to Microsoft's document site, one of their first suggestions in their in-place upgrade is they recommend removing security software before upgrading Windows. Seems counterintuitive, but unfortunately, whatever it is between the operating system and the OEM for these security software, they don't seem to work very well together today. Yes, sir.
Third-party encryption tools have the same issue, like semantic endpoint encryption behaves the same way. You can't upgrade without doing something to the encryption first.
Yeah. Same with BitLocker, right? You want to make sure you disable those processes, which is my earlier point. I've seen encryption software that does not provide any sort of scripted interface, which basically breaks your ability to do any sort of in-place upgrade. So having the ability to interface with that via automation as part of your task sequence to disable those protections during the upgrade is key. Another big piece of this, which we actually see a lot of companies maybe don't even realize that they should be going to UEFI, right? So Windows 7 was a legacy BIOS configuration, and all operating systems before that. We are very familiar with what an old BIOS looks like. A few years ago, UEFI was introduced. I believe that came out when Windows 8 landed, to start giving us a more secure boot process, in addition to being the fundamental platform on which everything, most of the security features of Windows 10 rely on that device booting in a UEFI configuration. So you can still build a machine with a legacy BIOS with Windows 10, but you can't do things like, let's see, credential guard, secure boot, right? All of those good security features that are part of the Windows 10 processes are no good to you in a legacy configuration, right? Can't enable them. So getting from a 7 to 10 and converting from a legacy BIOS to a UEFI configuration is key to really getting a more secure infrastructure as you move forward in your Windows 10 project. App compatibility, that's always something that's going to be there. I believe Microsoft has done a very good job, honestly, of not breaking most applications as you move from a Windows 7 to a Windows 10. Certainly not a blanket statement. There are pieces of software out there that are just not going to run properly on Windows 10. You might need to upgrade. Security software is one of them. I've seen a couple of cases where McAfee wouldn't even run on that version of Windows 10 until the next update came out. So they were working feverishly to get a new version of the AV product out to work with the next build of Windows 10. So app compatibility testing is can't be undersold of how important that is, right? We don't want to upgrade our machines and then crater our users from being productive. That's probably a resume generating event. We don't want to do that, so app testing is always key. And then drivers are always a challenge too. So if I'm moving from a legacy operating system to Windows 10, odds are the drivers that drove my Windows 7 box are not going to properly drive my Windows 10, right? So I have to be able to apply a new driver set as part of that upgrade process as well. So the impact for us, right, is testing. Lots and lots of testing, right? So we're going to have to do this on a reoccurring basis, right? At the very minimum, if we're doing fall release support, and that's our standard, every 30 months we have to have already been on a new build. So you're talking every 12 to 18 months, right? You're going to be going through an upgrade process. Making sure that you don't break any applications, making sure that your hardware is going to support it, validating driver sets in the new builds, because you may be able to do half your models may upgrade just fine to the next version of Windows 10 with the drivers that are in place. The other half may prevent the upgrade from happening because the driver sets need to be upgraded as part of that. So lots and lots of testing that goes into validating when I'm going to actually start deploying that I'm going to do it in a manner of which is going to make me successful, right? So we talked about it's a continuous deployment process. So the years of, we ran Windows 7 for what, 12, 14 years, I think was about the support lifecycle for that, which was great because that means we really only had one big operating system upgrade project, right? And that was probably 10, 12 years ago. And that was just maintaining and deploying patches and all of that. Well, obviously with Windows 10, those days are gone, right? So we're going to be doing an upgrade, an OS upgrade project every 12 to 18 months. Now granted, it's much, much less archaic than it used to be in the Windows XP and 7 days to try to do in-place upgrades or do a big OSD project in general. Another thing is every time we go to a new build of Windows 10, right, we've got to tweak our in-place upgrade. So prime example is 1809 introduced a nice edge icon on the desktop, which almost without fail, everybody that we deployed this to in our customer base was like, we don't want that shortcut on the desktop. We don't use Edge, but that was a feature that Microsoft built in, right? So those kind of things that we have to constantly be looking at to see and tweaking our in-place upgrade task sequences to make sure that we're providing the best user experience. And then when we go to a new build, we also have to create a new computer task sequence for that version of that operating system. We don't want to continue to deploy a download of our operating system in our PXE wipe and load process, and then just have to turn around and upgrade that when we're in the middle of an upgrade, right? So we have to do those things together to make sure that as we have approved that operating system works with everything, that becomes your standard for all new builds. And then of course we talked a little bit about it, driver updates. So some OEMs, if you've actually gone out and looked at their website, are now releasing driver packages that are specific to build versions of Windows 10. So there's, I'm not a developer, clearly. I don't know what the underlying pieces are that require driver updates to go from one version of 10 to the next. But it's a very common scenario that we have to address in our in-place upgrade process or our continuous servicing process. So some optimization ways to help this is upgrade readiness. Is anybody in here using upgrade readiness? No. Does anybody not know what upgrade readiness is? Okay. This is a very, very, very powerful tool that is free. It's a free cloud service, right? If you have an Azure subscription, you can spin up a free version of OMS, but if you own OMS, this is a component of OMS. You can use it in the paid version or the free version, doesn't matter. And then what you do is effectively you, before we go to the next, right? The telemetry engine that's built into Windows 10, or even Windows 7 for that matter, if you're still going from 7 to 10, you can send that telemetry data to your instance of OMS and to the upgrade readiness. And then using the vast database that Microsoft has from millions of clients, probably billions at this point, across the globe, they have a giant subset of data that tracks known application problems, known driver problems, all this different hardware, and they compare your data against what their database tells them, right? You have these applications, you have these models, you have these driver sets. We know this does not work and you're gonna have to address it before you upgrade. This application is not going to be compatible with the next version of Windows. It's certainly not going to give you everything because there's going to be things that are unique to your environment that they've never seen before. So some things will show up as unknown, but it really gives you a deep dive look into your operating system platform to see what things are going to potentially break before I upgrade. So very, very powerful. I highly recommend everybody implement this as part of their Windows 10, whether you're already on Windows 10 or you're still moving to Windows 10. This is going to help you. When you go to move to the next version of Windows, you go into the service and you say, now my new target version of operating system is 1909 or whatever the next release is. And it's going to compare all of that data with everything it knows about 1909 now and tell you where your potential pitfalls are going to be. So very, very useful tool that's free for everyone. There is some light integration with SCCM, but really the portal is going to give you the deep dive into the data. But you'll get some dashboardy type information in your SCCM console if you want to integrate that as well. So very, very, very useful tool that is free, so I feel like there's no reason not to use it, right? If you can convince whoever's managing your Azure, if that's not you, to help you configure this, it's a no-cost solution for everybody. The other piece is dynamic deployments. For the people that are moving to Windows 10, are you guys using task sequences today for in-place upgrades? I know a lot of people are doing like wipe and loads or new computer replacements, but anybody doing in-place upgrades with task sequences today? Okay, so task sequences are definitely still king. We have the ability in SCCM, if we so wanted, to set up deployment rings and try to deploy Windows 10 updates just like a software update. Right? Sounds very cool on the surface, right? I can just set my deployment rings, and then every time a new release is available, I can just let it go out and as part of my software update process, upgrade my machines. But remember all the pitfalls that we had talked about and the challenges of getting to Windows 10. What I can't do in that scenario is I can't take action on security software that may break my ability to upgrade. I cannot convert from legacy BIOS to UEFI as part of that process because I have no way to do that. So there's a lot of things that you're missing if you try to use the deployment rings. Where task sequences give you full pre and post deployment processes, right? I can do pre-caching, so I can cache all of the content. So one of the biggest challenges that we ran into in our Windows 10 deployments was people who are on Wi-Fi or people who are on very slow connections. Right? That's very challenging in a traditional in-place upgrade task sequence to get that process to work on a poor connection. Or if, let's say, in a scenario where I have a product that I have to uninstall, like an AV, because it's blocking my upgrade. Generally, an uninstall of an AV requires a reboot. So I have to put a reboot into my task sequence. Well, if I do that now in just a standalone task sequence, it's going to go through, remove the software, it's going to reboot the computer, and now I'm sitting at a login prompt. So my user is like, oh, I guess it's done. They log back in, and your task sequence is actually still running in the background. It just had to reboot the machine. So it's a very poor user experience from that scenario, so we'll talk a little bit about how we overcome that. But having the ability to take everything that's required for my in-place upgrade, so if you can see what we're looking at here, these are just snapshots of the two different task sequences that we would use in our in-place upgrade. So the one in the back is our pre-caching. So we use that to pre-cache the operating system. If there's a driver set specific to that machine, we use it to pre-cache that. And any applications or data that is referenced in the other task sequence, the one in the front, that's going to actually do the upgrade, is all pre-cached first via the first task sequence. The other pieces of that is we're running a compatibility upgrade process, right? So if you all are familiar with the in-place upgrades, there's a tick box on the upgrade Windows step to say, don't actually do the upgrade, just run through it and tell me if something's going to be incompatible. So we run that compatibility test as well. What we've seen is on average, on a decently connected device, that entire pre-caching process is like less than 15 minutes to go through, pre-cache everything, and to run a compatibility scan against that machine. We use hardware inventory extensions and registry keys, so we've extended the schema for the hardware inventory, and we write success and failures as part of our pre-caching process. Right, was I able to pre-cache my content? Yes, write a registry key that said it was successful. Was I able to pre-cache my operating system and all my packages? Right, was I, what was the exit code of my compatibility run? Right, if it's a not 0, if anybody's going through that, for whatever reason Microsoft didn't think an exit code 0 would be useful. That's only the way everybody does it. So there's a very specific exit code that means I passed and it's not 0. So we can key off of that as well to see that the compatibility test run properly. And if it didn't, we write that again to the registry. Then we use collections within ConfigMan to pull that information back in hardware inventory to see, I pushed this out to 100 devices, I know that 20 of them failed that compatibility check, and I can look and see what 20 machines are and go figure out why that was. And again, we're capturing all of the logs along the way as part of this process into a network folder so that we can go look at all of the Windows 10 in-place upgrade log. We can look at the task sequence logs, right? Anything that's relevant to what's going to be needed to upgrade that machine, we're grabbing that information, putting it into a network share. So assuming we get through all of that, and all of our pre-caching and our compatibility ran successfully, that means we now have a collection of machines that we can target with our upgrade task sequence because they're going to run it. One of the other things that we can do, clearly we've talked on several occasions, is converting legacy BIOS to UEFI. Very, very important, right, for Windows 10 if you want to take advantage of any of the security features, which I would hope that you would. So getting legacy to UEFI, converting into your task sequence is key for that, to make sure that you're getting as secure as possible. And that's done through OEM tools, right? So you have to use the OEM BIOS interfacing tools. Lenovo, for example, is a VB script. That's how they interface with their BIOS, which kudos to them. Maybe that someday they'll update it to PowerShell, but at least it's all driven through WMI interaction. Dell has the CCTK, I think is what it's called, that allows you to interface with the BIOS. HP has their own utilities. Microsoft doesn't need those utilities because they all ship in UEFI configuration. I'm not even sure you can go legacy on a Surface or not. I don't think you can. Can't say I've ever tried, but so you have to use the vendor tools to make the changes, and then there's a utility built into Windows I think it was like the second or third release of Windows 10, that converts your partition types from master boot record to GPT, and the various changes in the partitioning. So they allow you to do that. So using those utilities in a task sequence, I can easily convert my devices from legacy to UEFI as part of my in-place upgrade. And again, we have pre and post upgrade actions that we can take because it's a task sequence, right? We can do things after the upgrade is complete. We can also key off on a rollback if it started the process and something stopped and it rolled that operating system back. In our task sequences, we can key off of that and we can take action. Like if I had to uninstall my AV and the upgrade fails and rolls back, I want to make sure that that antivirus gets back on that machine rather than just leaving it exposed. And then self-service. So we have been taking this approach with our clients, and we have found great adoption and good feedback from the IT as well as the end users, is putting the upgrade into your user's hands with a subset of IT restrictions around it, right? Like a deadline date. Using a tool, we use a tool by a company called OneVen. If anybody's not familiar, you can go Google that. It's basically a scheduling front end to a task sequence. So we can deploy our task sequence to our devices, right? Maybe put a deadline date 30 years in the future so it doesn't actually kick off by itself. And then put this OneVen tool in place and deploy that. And what that does is it gives the user a dialogue to say, you have to upgrade your operating system, right? You can put your own verbiage in there. And then I have the ability to schedule it for a time that's convenient for me. Or I can click install now if they so choose. And actually, surprisingly, a lot of people just go ahead and click install now. But they can schedule it, right? So if they're busy and they know they're going to be busy for the next week, we've given them 30 days, let's say, or 2 weeks, say you can upgrade yourself. At the end of 2 weeks, we're going to upgrade it for you, regardless, right? So it really has driven a lot of adoption and rapid adoption, right? Given that ability to the user, rather than trying to go through the arduous processes of, right, okay, we've got these 20 machines, we need to make sure we work with these users, they're going to leave them on tonight, we're going to try and force an upgrade on them while they're online. The user shuts the machine down, or they actually take it home and they don't do it, and so you can't actually upgrade. It can be very frustrating. So having a user-driven process here gives the users the capability of scheduling it themselves.
What was the name of that tool?
I don't know if it actually has a specific name, honestly, but the company is called OneVen. So if you just Google OneVen task sequence or something, you'll find it. It's a free tool. It's written by a guy out of Sweden. Has been actively developed. He's done a lot of enhancements since its release. So it's a really, really cool product. Another great thing about this tool is that it has an MSI that you can apply as part of this process that creates a service that does a fake Windows 10, your Windows is upgrading with a little wheel that spins when you're upgrading. So when I have to do things like uninstall AV and reboot the machine, instead of coming back to a login screen and making the user think, well, it might be done and I'm going to try to log back in, it throws a full screen, I'm still upgrading Windows dialog up after that reboot, right? So it's a much, much better user experience. The first time we deployed, or we tried to deploy without that was what we were seeing that very quickly prompted us to go, we need some sort of interface into this. Because users were doing just that. They were rebooting the machines, logging back in, rebooting, all kinds of things to break that task sequence that was still running in the background. So it was a very poor experience until we implemented this tool. So with all of these things, right, the hero moment here is if I've gone through upgrade readiness and I've created all of these dynamic task sequences and I've obviously tested all this stuff and it works great, and I know I can target 90% of my organization now because they're on slow links or they only use Wi-Fi or things like that at home, I can still target them with this process. So if I pre-cache everything, I can run that completely offline. I can take that machine completely off the network. Now, what is normally maybe a 30 to 45 minute process is going to turn into a 4-hour process when it's offline, because if you don't know every single step in the task sequence, your client is trying to send that status back to the management point about success failures of everything that's happening. I mean, it can't do that, it does a retry, right? Every few seconds it retries a few times before it finally moves on. So those retries per process in your task sequence do add up. So it's going to take much longer in an offline scenario because of that, but it's still going to work because you don't need network connectivity to get that upgrade completed at that point. So the goal here, right, is that when I start down my Windows 10 servicing path, I can do it with confidence because I've got the data. I know what's going to break. I know that I need to go fix that prior. Right? I'm using upgrade readiness to see what apps I may need to address prior to my rollout. Right? What drivers I need to upgrade, all of those sort of things. Along with dynamic and self-service driven task sequences has proven to be a very successful combo of getting Windows 10 implemented in your organizations. Any questions about that?
Have you seen the Windows Analytics yet? Is that going to replace some of these things, or?
I don't know. So like upgrade readiness itself has changed several times since they first implemented that, changed names. So I don't know if they'll end up rolling that into Windows Analytics at this point or not, but seems to make sense that you would try to just combine all of that into one platform for the various reasons of why you would use it. But I don't know for sure if that's on the roadmap or not. And you can configure telemetry data for your clients now in SCCM if you're on a certain version of current branch. So if you're keeping your infrastructure, your SCCM infrastructure updated, the telemetry settings can be configured in the console and applied to your devices. You don't necessarily have to use group policy, but you can use group policy to configure that as well if you'd like. All right, any other questions around our new jobs of constantly upgrading Windows? Everybody excited about that? Okay. All right, so here we're going to talk about OSD Insights. So I talked about this a little when we first started this, right? But the ability to see how and when and why things are being built, where they're built, has value on multiple fronts. So and our challenges today is how do we get that data, right? Well, today I can go in, if I know a machine was rebuilt, I can go look at some status messages and probably get some information about that machine. I can try to use the built-in reports, but who here thinks the ConfigMan built-in reports are the greatest thing ever? You're fired. So there are some good reports in the built-in reporting, but a lot of the reports leave a lot to be desired, and they haven't really been updated much over the last several years, which is quite shocking actually, because the company who wrote the software that manages the systems, that integrates with the software that was written for reporting, they're providing these reports and they're really not that great, many of them.
300 and some odd reports are terrible.
Yeah, out of the 400 default ones, yeah.
That's right.
Right, and the inability to see failure trends. Right? Can you say right now what is a trending failure across your organization? Because a lot of times the help desk will see this, right? They'll see a task sequence fail, but it'll never make its way back to you as the admin or the engineer who's managing this to know that those things are failing, right? They may just go manually install something and go, okay, it's good, just push it out the door, right? They may just re-image it and it works the second time, but you didn't get notified that, hey, it actually failed the first time, right? So it's very difficult today to find failure trends in your operating system deployment process. And then historical lookups. So can I go back 6 months ago and see any given machine, when was it built, where was it built, how was it built, did everything succeed, did it fail? Right, I can't really do that very well today in SCCM. So really what we're talking about is overall lack of visibility into my operating system platform that I spent so much time engineering, and I don't really have a good feel for how everything's working. So those are some big challenges. We have tried to overcome this challenge in what we were deeming the OSD Insights pack. Right, so all of our UEM as a service clients, which some of them are here today, we have this implemented in their environment. So we're tracking all of this process into a custom database. So we have some dashboards and some reports that we are continuing to ongoing develop. We have 25 or something reports right now, and a dashboard that we can send to the managers who oversee these, the engineers of this team. So they get a dashboard report every week that says, here's everything that was built last week, here's the successes, here's the failures, what was the most common failure if there were failures, right? What was my average speed of building a machine, right? So today, can you tell me how long it takes for your operating system deployment process to go? Right? Yeah, you may be able to ballpark it, but with this solution, you get raw data, right? This is how long it took. The key ability to identify failures and trends in failures. So one of our clients, actually, the day after we implemented this, right, we started seeing failure. So I contacted the manager and said, I'm seeing a lot of task sequence failures in your environment. It had to do with McAfee. Like, were you guys aware of this? No. Right, so the team that manages the infrastructure wasn't even aware of it. And when we put this in, within 2 days, we were able to identify, hey, there's a problem here. There is a McAfee problem here, and we need to solve it because you got devices going out the door with no AV on them, right? And if the people aren't reporting this, you have no way of really knowing that that's happening unless you're just constantly in config man looking at deployment status messages, which everybody loves to sit around and do that all day, right? So we can correlate issues to machine types as well, right? So if we have failures, we can see, is that failure always happening on a very specific model, right? Then we know it's a problem with that model, maybe a driver problem or a firmware problem. And again, we talked about we could track build times. So that's important because if my average build process, let's say at my corporate office, is 45 minutes, 80 minutes, something like that, and all of a sudden I'm building a machine, it shoots to 2 hours. Maybe it completed successfully, right? Well, why is that? Well, it could be a boundary issue, right? Because now I'm sitting on my corporate network, but my boundary is configured to talk to some server that's across the WAN somewhere. And now I'm building a machine across a WAN link or something stupid like that, right? We can see those build times. We can see what distribution point that machine was built from, right? A lot of data that I'm going to show you here in the reports. And this process plugs into any task sequence. So whether it's in-place upgrades or wipe and load task sequences, we can track a lot of really good data around these processes. So without further ado, we're going to demo. So that's just kind of a snapshot of what we're going to see here. The data in this demo, it's in my lab, is actually a snapshot of real-world data with the sensitive stuff scrubbed. Yeah, everybody has Bob Smith. It's his admin account. Wow. That's enhanced. So let's try that. There we go. So remember I was talking about the McAfee issue, right? This is a snapshot of data of about 2 weeks after we implemented this into their environment. Right? We could see instantly McAfee endpoint security was failing to install. Right? So very quickly we were able to go back to our client and say, we've got a problem here, we need to figure this out. Right? We were able to determine what the issue was and remediate it so that that issue is now gone. Without this, we have to rely on people, techs who are out there doing it, to make sure that they're notifying us when this kind of stuff happens. So this is just a dashboard, right, that we can use to see, like, what is our average build time, right? What is our percentages of success and failures there? With these, I can drill down into successes if I want. My super speedy lab. Apparently not. There it goes. And this is just a small subset of data that I've pulled out of the database, the middleware database for this. I've got all sorts of additional detailed information that I could look at if I want. But for the summaries, I just want to see kind of a quick glance. What distribution point was that machine built off of? What task sequence was running? Did it succeed or fail? Computer name, right? Where it was located from an Active Directory perspective. And of course, build date is always very useful. I can also get a count of how many task sequences, right? So this is important because, for instance, we have a client that still has Windows 7 and a Windows 8.1 task sequence that is required because of software in their environment. So those task sequences are still there and available. But their standard is Windows 10. So if we start seeing the numbers of Windows 8.1 and 7 tick up, in this scenario, then we know people are using the wrong task sequence, right? We got to go address that. Today, you wouldn't really have any idea if that was happening. So that's one use of that. But just getting a glance to see how many people are building machines. Right? So we build all this awesome platform and this automated build process, and we make it super easy for techs to use. And then the double-edged sword there is that in many cases it becomes a crutch. Right? Do I troubleshoot, or do I just press this button and wipe it all out and let it start over? Right? There's a very good use case for that in some situations, right? But this process shouldn't be used as the first line of defense for troubleshooting, because you need to identify what problems are happening in your environment. So if you see machines being re-imaged at an alarming rate, right, that may be a conversation you have with your service desk and your desktop techs. Say, what's going on here? Why are we rebuilding these machines over and over and over? Are we not doing any troubleshooting, that sort of thing? So data that we can glean from that. And then I can do average build times per distribution point. Right, so I can see if, for instance, this is a remote site and it's 95 is my average build time, and then next month I run this report and I see that shot up to 240 minutes or 280 minutes. What is in that process that's causing that slowdown? Right, is it part of my task sequence? Is something stalled there? Is it a network issue? Is it a boundary issue? Kind of gives you some good insight into that. Let's go to let's see. Let's look at a failed deployments. Right. Oh, that's probably really hard to read, that red on black text. I apologize. But as part of this, when a task sequence fails, right, as we all know, we can capture that failure in the task sequence, and we can do things based on the fact that that task sequence failed. Well, as part of this process, actually grabs the step from the log that failed in the task sequence. And we rewrite that into the record of this deployment so that we can see very quickly what failed on that device. So there's a lot of good useful information from an administrative standpoint, right? For us as admins, us as admins, I can't tell you how often I have spent going back and forth with end users or desktop techs, trying to get all the information I need to troubleshoot this device, right? Generally, it's this task sequence failed, right? And it has an exit code of blah, 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 and they give you that nice exit code that's on screen that doesn't really tell you anything about what actually failed. So you're going back and forth, well, I need to get the logs, right? Can you send me the logs? Can you open a command prompt and, blah, blah, blah. You spend a lot of time going back and forth with desktop techs to try to figure out what is actually happening, where this is going to capture all the logs in the failure process to a network share, and it's going to write what the actual step in the task sequence that failed is so that you can see it right there at a glance. So if somebody calls and says, hey, my task sequence failed, you can just go right here and go, what's the machine name? Okay, I see the task sequence, I see why it failed. Now let me go dig through the logs that I've captured to see how to remediate. Yes, sir?
The common scenario that we've had to use this for also is people just plain being incorrect and saying, you say, I've got this test sequence for you to test this driver you requested, and they say it failed, and you look and they ran the production draft testing.
Yes. That's a good point. Yeah. So interfacing with people who are testing and things like that.
Information saves you a lot of time and emails back and forth.
Yeah. No, let's go to, what do we got here? So this was on our dashboard, but here I can also get a report of different task sequences that were executed. And I could drill down into that and look at all of the records, right? See why it failed, what task sequence, when it ran, what's location, which distribution point, tracking the elapsed time. We actually also do a speed test, which is how we get those average, oh no, that's not that, it's a different set, but we're doing a speed test as part of this, and we're capturing that information as well, so that we can trend speed tests to the distribution point over time. So if we see it's fairly level most of the time, we're good, or maybe the third week of every month we see it spike way up, right? What's going on where during that time period, the LAN traffic seems to be flooded.
So right now, this is just for the deployment itself. Is there like a future state for deployments of like applications and packages as well?
So the short answer is yes. We have designs on taking the same sort of functionality that we're doing for OS deployment and seeing how we can glean that for application software updates, things like that. We're not there yet, but that is definitely on our roadmap to do something very similar to this around applications and other features of SCCM, for sure. What else we got in here? Oh, yeah, so I can do deployments by date range, right? So if you ever want to go back and look how many machines were built and deployed last month, right? I can go run those date range reports. Now this data is a couple of months old, so I got to go back to May. I can view that report. So I can see all the machines that were built, whether there's a success, failure, what task sequence, and what distribution point they were built off of. So as you can see, when we first implemented, this is where we started seeing all these McAfee failing to install, which prompted us to take action. Deployments by date range. That was the snapshot overview. You already seen that. Average build time, yeah, so that's build time. We have a new report that we're actually sending to our clients on a weekly basis, but unfortunately this data is old, so there is no weekly report because it's my lab data and it's not being kept up to date. But part of this, we're actually tracking the average in-place upgrade time as well. So we plug this into our Windows 10 pre-caching task sequence and our Windows 10 in-place upgrade task sequence. So we can track the time, success, failures of those as well as part of this process. And the ability to get an average in-place upgrade time is massive, because then you have better ammo to go at your users to say, this is going to take 3 hours or this is going to take about an hour, right? You've got data in here that you can validate towards that process. And again, trending failures, right? We can see that McAfee Endpoint Security 10.6.1, we had 20 failures over the course of whatever the snapshot of this data was. So there's a problem there, right? And then again, our average Pixie build time per distribution point. So a lot of really good insight data in here. This is still being developed. So although we are using it actively and we're gaining value from it and we're supplying data to our clients from it, we are still actively developing this, right? Adding more things in. Just recently we added in the ability to grab TPM information, right? So now we can easily report in this same location when a machine was built. I can look at, was it built in UEFI or was it legacy? Does it have TPM 1.2 or 2.0? Is the TPM on, owned, active? All of that information is now also stored in this database that I can look up for any machine in my environment. So some of that hasn't made it into my lab because the newer features we just implemented all of our clients, I did not port into my lab for today's demo, unfortunately. We'll just take a very quick look at the database so I can kind of show you everything that's being collected. UEM. Okay, so this is where those reports we're pulling from. So we can see all the different stuff we're capturing, right? Start time, end time, that's how we get to the elapsed time. What model it was. So as you can see here, one of the fixes that we had to add in that it was actually a bug in the script that converts or looks at the computer system product class of WMI on Lenovo, since they want to be unique and not store their friendly names where everybody else does. So that's actually addressed now in production, but not in this database. Manufacturer, target OU and actual OU. Now I pulled those out because I didn't want to have you guys see actual real world OU structures for one of our clients. But I know on many occasions I've been in a scenario where somebody calls and says, I built this machine, but something's acting funny or it's not configured right. I can go and look in that record and I can see what did my task sequence tell me that machine should be going to, what OU, and then what OU is it actually sitting in. Right? So that tells me that the computer already existed, maybe in the wrong OU, And maybe I need to implement a process into my task sequence to make sure it moves objects from its existing OU to whatever your machine object OU variable in your task sequence says, which is fairly easy to implement. But we can also track, is that actually working, right? If it's failing, why is it failing? We can see this is what the task sequence said it should be, this is what it actually is. If those don't match, then we need to go take action and figure out why. Location is actually something that's tied into a product that we use. So it's a model developed product called DDI. It's the Dynamic Deployment Interface. I'm not going to do too much deep diving on it today, but it's basically a front end to your Pixie task sequences that allows you to do a very, very large set of things to make your task sequence more dynamic. One of those is a location selector. So if I want to do things based on where my device is, I can use the DDI to set those locations. I'm capturing that information as part of this. So if you don't use DDI, this will just show up as a null entry. Capturing how much memory is in the device, the disk size of the device, and the disk type. So I can start to, and we haven't done this yet, but eventually we want to get to the point where I want to run reports where I can see, I can tell a time difference, and I can provide that to my business to say, these machines that have SSDs, they build in 40 minutes. Right? These machines that have 5,400 RPM hard drives take 2.5 hours. Right? Is there a trade-off on upgrading that hard drive to an SSD to make the user more productive? May or may not be useful to you, but it's something that we wanted to have there in case that scenario came up. We can track that. IP address is key because it's generally one of the first things we ask the text, right? What's the IP address? We want to make sure that if it's not able to build successfully, right? Is there anything in the subnet that they're on that's maybe having problems, right? So we can get that information. Installed apps. So you can't see it because I'm not going to expand it because it'll fling it right way off the window here. But we're also tracking applications that were installed into the add remove programs or programs and features, sorry, in the registry per build, right? So I can go back and see everything that was installed that day. It's going to disregard anything that's in your core image because it's not going to have an install date of today. So that's what we're keying off of. So if I have an install date of today, it's going to grab all of that information so I can see what applications were installed on that device during that deployment. And then of course I'm pulling what distribution point I'm running from. So that's always good for us too, right? If we don't know, somebody just says a build failed, we can go see where this machine was at, what distribution point it was using, and see if there's a problem on that DP, for example. Speed test. We're tracking this information, so eventually we'll be able to graph, average speeds of our communication from our client to the distribution point. So if we see spikes in that, we can try to figure out why. Track of what kind of start type. I think all of these, or most of these, are going to be Pixie. Oh, we got some client initiated in here. So did I initiate this task sequence from a Pixie boot, or did I do a Software Center or one VIN front end to Software Center task sequence deployment, right? So was it client initiated or was it Pixie initiated? And this will also track if you're doing USB, right? If you take the same task sequence, you put it on a USB stick, you ship that out, the information that goes in here is that it was built from USB, right? So give you an idea of how many machines are being Pixie booted versus upgraded through a task sequence. If you're using user affinity as part of any sort of front-end structure that basically sets, there's a variable that you can set that if you're using any front-end tool like DDI, for example, that we use, that allows us to do user affinity, it sets a variable that SCCM knows about. It's a standard variable that'll define that affinity as part of the deployment process. If that's entered into the process, then that user affinity will also show up here. Tracking what chassis type, the serial number, MAC address, AD site, boot mode, right? So I can report back to our clients, hey, your techs are building all these Windows 10 machines, but they're all in a legacy configuration, right? So all of those cool security features you implemented via GPO in Windows 10 are not going to apply to these machines. So having the ability to see that that is happening and being able to go to address it and say, hey, make sure that we're flipping those BIOSes to UEFI before you Pixie boot these machines and build it with Windows 10. And the start date is something we're just using the key off of, and then of course we enabled the TPM version, whether it's enabled, owned, or activated. So a lot of really useful information in here that we can carve up many ways to provide value, not only for us as the people who are troubleshooting and trying to remediate issues, right, but being able to provide a dashboard now to our clients to say, here's all of the activity around operating system deployment that's happened in the last 7 days or the last 30 days. And we give them the ability to run reports. If they want to go look a machine up and see when it was rebuilt, they can do that now. So very, very useful here. Full disclosure, this whole thing came about by me reading a blog from somebody else who was doing something sort of similar, but they weren't using any sort of database. They were just using log files that they could go look at and capture some information about that process. That sparked the idea of, well, if I'm going to do that, why don't I store that data so I can create reports? And what started as just a handful of data about what we were looking at in the blog is now turned into 3 or 4 revisions later of all of this data that we find now useful for our troubleshooting or for our clients. So still being developed. I wouldn't consider this the end-all final release. I'm sure we'll find other things that we want to capture as part of this process as we go along. But generally speaking, it's a pretty easy upgrade process to get this upgraded. So if it's something that you're interested in, again, if this is something that we implement, if you are a partner of ours in a UEM as a service capacity, this is something that we just implement standard so that everybody has it. So you guys have it, Rick, you guys have it. Yeah. Yeah, you actually should be getting a weekly report out of it. So, okay, good. So just let us know if you're interested to hear more about it. Yes, sir.
So it seems like it's an off-premise solution. Is there a way to do that for us, or a financial institution? I can see a problem sending all that data off-site to a third party.
This is all self-contained in your network.
So it is? Okay.
Yes. Yeah, so our general recommendation, although it's not a requirement, would be to create the database for this on your SCCM server. It's a fairly small database, so that it is all self-contained in your environment, in your data center. If the database needs to live somewhere else, you could do that as well. It'll still write to it no matter where it lives. But the way we've been implementing is just a complement to the SCCM database on that server, and that's where we're storing the data. Yeah. Yeah, this wouldn't fly in many organizations if this was like a cloud-based solution. We're taking all this data and storing it in somebody else's data center effectively. No, so this is completely on-prem. Any other questions? No. All right. Okay, so last thing I want to talk about is modern endpoint management. This was a buzzword that started, I don't know, probably a year or so ago that seemed to really start to ramp up this concept of modern management. So as you can see, kind of the sub point there is challenge everything. When you start looking at modern management, you kind of got to wipe the slate clean of this is how I've always done it, right? Because the tools and the technology that enable modern management don't fit into that mold at all. So you really got to challenge yourself to kind of break out of your own mind and how we've always done things to take an objective look at modern management and how it can actually help you. So as we talk about traditional endpoint management, right, we probably do build and capture our WIM files, patch them, right, stick them in config-man, deploy them. Still valid, right? We do our wipe and load task sequences, still valid. Right, we have probably scripts to configure our process during configure our operating system during task sequence. We have GPOs that we have to apply to conform to company standards. Many cases I see people running scripts to remove modern apps out of Windows 10 because we don't want people playing Candy Crush because they shipped it with Enterprise for whatever reason. We have VPNs, right, that we have to manage to get access back to our data. We deploy our apps and our software updates each month, right? We package all of our stuff and stick it into config-man. This is all things that we've probably been doing for the last 15 to 20 years. Now, granted, the technology has come a long way from where it was 20 years ago, and we were trying to do this stuff, and we had to write everything in batch files and stuff. It was very much a pain. So the technology has definitely increased to allow us to do traditional management very well. Cross-shipping broken devices, right? So I've got a road warrior, their device breaks. How do we handle that? Generally, we say, we'll ship you a new one. You ship your old one back. Right, I'm infected with the virus. Okay, ship us your computer. We'll ship you a new one. A lot of cross-shipping of devices going on in traditional management. So really, to me, this kind of comes down to 4 basic questions. I'm just going to throw them up there. 4. There we go. All right. Our lot in life as IT people is I need to be able to provide apps and data securely. Right? I need to protect the user data to make sure, like things like data loss prevention policies, that sensitive data doesn't leak out of my organization. I need to protect that user account from being compromised and used in malicious ways. And I want to make computing easy. And I think, unfortunately, all too often we take that 4th bullet and that really becomes an afterthought, right? Because we're so focused on making sure everything's secure, right? And making sure everything's locked down and the user can't disrupt all this awesome stuff that we do, which generally leads to a not so great user experience on the other side. So really taking, especially as the new generation of IT people come up, right? They're not going to expect that their machine is going to get pixie built and I have to wait and all this other stuff, right? My kids grew up with instant access. I press a button, I get what I need, right? Their attention span is like 15 minutes. It's like the average YouTube video. So the user experience is all too often overlooked as part of this process, because the goal in any organization, right, is to make our users as productive as they can be, which makes the business more productive, which makes the business more profitable, right? Which is our ultimate goal, is to keep the business moving forward, right? Save money. If we can get a very easy, friendly user experience and still provide them with secure apps and data, right, and secure their accounts, that makes for a very happy end user, right, and a very less frustrated IT department in many cases. So the optimization, right, for the hero moments here is, first is, like we said, question everything you do today traditionally, because modern management does not fit into that mold. It's a vastly different experience. Next thing would be start familiarizing yourself with the modern management technology. Right, so we're going to get to a slide after this one that shows kind of a large chunk of the subset of technology that can make up this modern management experience. But really, you're talking about Azure Active Directory. Right? If you have Office 365, you have Azure Active Directory. Now, to the extent of which you can use that to do other things relies on being licensed for Azure Active Directory Premium or EMS, or the Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite. So having Azure Active Directory is the fundamental directory service, right, that you're going to use for your Windows 10 devices. If you're not aware, you can take a Windows 10 device and in the out-of-box experience, you put your email address, right, to the user. It's their email and their password. It's their user account and password, and let the out-of-box experience automatically enroll, join Azure Active Directory as your directory instead of your on-prem Active Directory. Have it apply conditional access policies, right, that we've talked about. Have it auto-enroll in Microsoft Intune to be managed as a device. And if you have an on-prem infrastructure, you can have that also deploy a config manager agent to your device so that you're now in a co-managed scenario. And I could do this from anywhere I can get internet, right? So that's kind of the whole concept around modern management is I don't want to have to be on my corporate network in order to provision a device. I want to be able to take a device directly from an OEM, go to Best Buy, if you will, right? I don't think we're there yet. Most companies aren't ready for that yet. But technically, you say, my requirements for you to work here is I need a Windows 10 professional or better, and I want a TPM chip. That's requirements. I don't care what the piece of hardware is. Go buy it, make sure it meets that requirements, right? We're not quite there yet. I think most people still want to control some standards around their hardware. But you could certainly go to a choose your own device, right? You select, these are the approved devices, and however you achieve those, you could do that. I think eventually we will get to a point where the underlying hardware is inconsequential. Right? Because really what we're doing here is we want to manage a Windows 10 device. We don't want to manage a Lenovo, T470. We care about Windows and how we can interact with Windows and provide application and user data. So there's a slew of technology in Azure Active Directory especially on the premium side, that allows you to do a lot of really feature-rich things. So you take an objective look, right? Once you start to familiarize yourself with the tools, right? Do some research. I think you can even spin up free labs with at Microsoft. One of their websites you can spin up and kind of put yourself through an Intune scenario and some. Does anybody know what that's called? It's not virtual labs, but there's anyway, if you Google it, you'll find it. So think objectively how a modern management scenario can work in your organization. Right? Road warriors are prime for modern management. People who never connect to your network or rarely connect to your network. Right? How many challenges do we have with those users when we give them a domain joined device and then they go off the network for 300 days? Right? Their password has changed, but I'm not on the network, so now my password and my cache credentials are out of sync. Right? Numerous challenges, right? Unless they're doing cloud like OneDrive for Business, right? How are they syncing data back to their corporate network? Maybe they have to use a VPN. Okay, well now I have to rely on a VPN to make sure my data is backed up, things like that. So tons of challenges. The machine falling off the domain, so the next time they come in, they plug in, I can't log in because the trust relationship has been broken. All of that fun stuff that we've been dealing with for years for road warriors. Most of that stuff goes right out the window in a modern management scenario, right? Because I don't have those restrictions. I can join a directory that's in the cloud. I don't have to be connected to my corporate network. The next piece is pilot it, right? Once you start to familiarize yourself with the tools, you can get a free version of Intune, a trial version of Intune if you want to take it for a spin, right? See how it works for you. You could sign up for a free trial of Azure Active Directory, right? Put all this stuff together in a pilot and figure out, does this make sense for my organization? I can tell you, I don't believe that modern management is the solution for all machines at all companies right now. I don't think it's there yet. I think we're headed to that direction. But I think it is absolutely in a scenario where if you have mobile workforce, this is a prime example of how to increase or decrease your administrative overhead for managing these devices and give the user a much better experience. Because if I'm out with a Windows 10 device and I'm Azure Active Directory joined and Intune joined and I've got all my policies and stuff there, and my device gets infected with a virus and I can't get it off, right? I call the IT department, go to settings, click reset. Wipe the operating system back to Windows 10 default, my out-of-box experience, put my user credentials back in. Now I've rejoined Active Directory, all my Intunes, my applications, my policies, my configuration all come right back down to my machine. Maybe I'm setting up OneDrive for Business and folder redirection, so if I had desktops and documents and all of that, boom, that's all comes back as soon as I'm in my OneDrive. So without any IT involvement at all, other than saying go reset your device and log back in, I've just redeployed that machine on the internet, right? Didn't have to be on a corporate network. So those are the kind of things you got to think about when you start thinking about what am I doing today and how can this type of scenario make my job easier and make my users less frustrated, because they don't have to wait for a broken or a cross-ship device and things like that. They can just reset it and go back about their day and in a couple of hours, right? They're back up and running. So it's very powerful stuff. And this has come a long way. I can tell you when we were doing presentations on Intune 3 years ago or so, it was pretty primitive at that time. It is nothing what it looks like today. So the cloud capabilities of Intune are always continuing to grow. Just recently, Microsoft released administrative templates for Intune, right? So if you think about GPOs, right, administrative templates in your group policies, we didn't have that capability in Intune, but now we do. We have a lot of configuration capabilities of administrative templates now in the cloud. So every month or every few months when they do incremental updates to Intune, they're adding lots of really cool new features. They're going to make modern management even more easy to go about your business. So again, it starts with the mindset change, right? About, and most people are guilty of this, including myself, right? It's like, well, I'm very familiar with how we do it today, and that's how we've always done it, and it works very well. So, I may not need to do this, right? But this is going to be the future, right? One way or the other. I don't know how long that future is, if it's 5, 10 years away, but the concept of taking a device, right, and taking that perfectly good operating system off of it and reapplying my own with all these configurations and all this complexity around it, right, that will eventually go away, right? The idea behind Windows 10 is that there's already a good operating system. I can reconfigure that however I want it. I can change it from a pro SKU to an enterprise SKU if I need to. I don't have to wipe the operating system off to do that. So I can do a lot of what I would normally do in a wipe and load scenario. I can now do that with an existing operating system that sits on that device. So that just kind of shows you the life cycle process of Windows Autopilot, which is one of the ways to optimize this process. Right? So it's basically, has anybody ever used like the Apple DEP program? Yeah. So it's very similar in concept to the Apple DEP, right? You set your devices up, you pre-configure how you want those devices to look, and when those devices join your domain, that information is immediately applied to that device. All right, so it gives you a very easy out-of-box experience for an end user, right? So I can ship a device directly to an end user, or have, if Dell's my vendor, I can say just ship that laptop directly to Sally in Houston, right? She gets that. I've already configured the autopilot for that device. All she has to do is power it on, make sure it's connected to the network. The rest of it takes over, right? I can start applying applications, settings, conditional access, MFA. I can go through all of that stuff, right? As part of that out-of-box experience. And then very shortly thereafter, it's business ready. So I've supplied her with the apps, maybe her data through OneDrive, right? If I break or for whatever reason that device needs to be reset, I can just reset it and the whole process starts over again, right? So I don't have to go pixie build that machine to get rid of bad things happening on it. So very, very cool and powerful tools. So again, it allows us to pre-configure, improves the out-of-box self-service experience, right? Auto-enrollment as part of this process into Intune for management and ongoing settings. And then again, the concept of managing the existing OS, right? So it's Windows 10, what you're gonna wipe and load off of it is also Windows 10. We can just reconfigure it. Right? You can work with your OEM too if you want to make sure it's a vanilla image, right? You can give that to your OEM and say, this is what I want you to apply to my devices. If you're concerned about, you know, what your OEM may be putting in the default operating system. But again, you could just use Intune to uninstall all of that stuff as part of the configuration if you want. Right? I don't need to wipe the operating system out. I just need to reconfigure it and conform it to my standards, which you can do now, which is very cool stuff. Right? So apply your standards for compliance to the existing operating system. So the Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite, is everybody familiar with this? I know some of you guys are licensed for it already. But it's a suite of tools revolved around Azure Active Directory. So rights management you get with Enterprise Mobility. So if you want to secure things like emails and people putting attachments in emails, right? Rights management is built into the cloud service where you can take advantage of that and create secure profiles so that you can send secure emails without people being able to forward them or print them or things like that. Starts with Windows 10, right? Technically you can use Windows 8.1 I think still, but don't do that. Still manage it with ConfigMan, right? You have Microsoft Intune as part of that. Office 365 is a big part of that, right? OneDrive for Business is part of that modern management scenario. The Azure Active Directory, advanced threat analytics, conditional access policies, right? Or information protection policies. All of these tools, right, can be combined to create a very easy to understand from a user perspective process of provisioning a device. To a much less required time for our engineers, right? We can configure this much easier than we can go through the process of standing up ConfigMan and creating all these complex deployment processes. So I personally believe that this is going to be what the future is, right? That eventually the days of pixie booting a machine are going to be very much behind us. At least for the majority, right? Today, I don't think this is a good displacement for traditional back office machines yet, but we are getting there rapidly. But there's certainly a use case right now for it in many scenarios. Okay, so a little shameless plug here. You guys probably know this, but how can we help Again, so we talked about when we started, we have our unified endpoint management as a project. So if there's things in here, if you want to see demonstrations, right, or you want to do a pilot or a proof of concept and things like this of modern management scenarios around Windows 10 and Intune, we can do that on a time and materials basis or statement of work, help you guys get implemented. Then we have our as a service, right, which some of our clients here and somebody I'm actually going to introduce here in a minute, to where we just work as an extension to your IT team. Right, so what we used to call ourselves is a managed services provider. We started rebranding that a while back because we don't fit into the bucket of managed service provider. So normally when you think an MSP, you think I'm outsourcing my IT to somebody else, right? Which is not what we do. We want to work with your IT team. We want to take a lot of the mundane software patching, right, managing your task sequences, keeping your operating systems up to date, things like that, off of your plate so that you can focus on the 500 business objectives that are constantly being crammed down your throat. Right, so we want to be an extension to your team, not a replacement to your team, which is why we kind of broke away from the whole managed services thing, because it doesn't really fit what we do. So the UEM as a service team, right, these are all seasoned engineers, right? They've been doing this kind of stuff for a very long time. So the ability to jump right in and start seeing immediate value in these is very apparent very quickly. So long history of managing endpoints and managing end user experiences through policies and the SMS 1.2 up till current branch today, right? Who said that? Oh, yeah. It wasn't an exciting product at all by any stretch. So we utilize ServiceNow as a portal, so that's how we interface with our clients, very easy to interface with us. And it is each contract we also supply a subset of support hours that we can put towards things that are not necessarily detailed in your contract, the terms of the agreement. So on the right there is just a few of our UEM as a service clients that we work with to help them propel their business forward, right? The idea is for us to empower our clients to be the heroes in their organization, right? Take the day-to-day mundane stuff off their plate, work with them to talk about new technologies and maybe help them implement new technologies as it relates to their business. So we've had a lot of success, I hope, which brings me to our guest speaker, Mr. Rick Baisley. Rick works for Novus International. We've been a client and a partner of Novus since 2014, I believe. So I've done a lot of work with them in many capacities. And Rick is the Senior Manager of Business Systems, so he gets to see and touch all the things that we're talking about today.
Give him at least one of your microphones.
Yeah. I'm going to give you all three. How do you think of that?
But you don't know which one goes.
I think they all work, but I think we're going for like stereo.
All right, good. So as William said, my name is Rick Baisley, Senior Manager at Novus International. Novus International is a global company in the agribusiness field. Our vision is to help feed the world and help people achieve a good quality of life. He touched on shipping computers, cross-shipping and that sort of thing. That's really, really easy in this country to do. FedEx will deliver a new computer to somebody next day if you need it to. It's not easy from Brazil to Argentina. It's super expensive. You're going to pay duties and that sort of thing. And then try to ship a device into Russia. Okay? It's not going to make it there. 75% of the time, that laptop won't make it to the target person. So I'm a big believer of the modern management system where you go buy a reputable device from a reputable dealer, the user takes it home and sets it up, and boom. As we all know, they're becoming less and less devices. The remote users don't VPN anymore, as what they did. Emails in the cloud, OneDrive, HR. Put their HR tools into the cloud, Ulta Pro or Workday or whatever. So, but we're working hard with Model and Microsoft to do that. Actually, there's a fast-track meeting in 5 minutes to help that. So we've been using Model for their UEM AAS. They've rebranded it. I'm having a hard time with the new acronym. Yeah, it's very much, it's two TLAs jammed together. It's worked very well for us. They came in and we went with SCCM to help us with the XP to Windows 7 big migration, and we got through that, but because we didn't have the in-house engineering experience and expertise with SCCM, basically we were withering away. We were failing on our endpoint management, and so I met William at a similar thing, and we became partners. And they really, I wanted to say they came in and rescued SCCM, but that's not what they did. They rescued our endpoint management for us. Now, for 4 years, 5 years, we've been managing our endpoints really well. The Windows 10 migration went super easy because of our partnership with Model. So I'll take any questions if you have them, but
For the next 2 minutes.
next 2 minutes, okay. And then,
Says question.
yeah. I have a question though. Why aren't we using conditional access?
In our environment, we saw, if we didn't want somebody to, log in from St. Louis and then, 5 minutes later in Nigeria, if they had a Verizon phone, they would have an IPv6 address, which has no location. If you guys have seen anything where Verizon cell phones have IPv6, there's no location associated with that. So we couldn't use it. As soon as they turned it on, the Verizon phones no longer worked.
That's interesting.
Do you have locations that are trusted locations? Is that what you were using?
We did have some trusted locations, so if they were on-prem, right, if they were on our subnets, or they were coming from IP addresses, out of WAN.
Yeah.
But.
So I do a lot of conditional access setup, so I'm really interested in some of these.
Probably
So-
best served at the bar. That's just where I do my best work.
Yeah.
I believe it's still set up for me, but I have an AT&T phone.
Oh, yeah.
How long ago was that happened?
Weeks, maybe a
Oh,
month.
so it was pretty
Okay.
recent.
Yeah, that was recent.
So we're not using trusted locations. I mean, we went with conditional access because we got phished for almost $500,000. Yeah, it was, so that's $500,000, that's after. That's, I don't know how many dollars, that's millions of dollars of sales at the top line to write somebody bad guy a good check for $500,000. So we did conditional. We're not using location. We're using more devices. Your mobile device has to have the Intune. It has to be registered, and in order to register it, you have to have MFA. Or it has to be, or it's a hybrid joined, domain joined device, right? Then it's okay, something you have, and then you have a password, something you know. And if you don't have those, we don't let you in. And it was a guy in Nigeria that got our money. So yeah. And I found it really easy. Honestly, really easy. We set up 3 conditional access policies. One was, people that were, mobile and kind of more, maybe more sophisticated, more, whatever. And they could MFA in, right? They could be challenged and that sort of thing. Then we had one group that is device only. The people, they're always going to, accounts payable, accounts receivable, they're always going to work from the office on a Novus computer. They will never multi-factor. You have to have a Novus computer, and you have to have a Novus password. And then to make it fast for us, we set up exceptions. It's like, oh, that didn't work, and that didn't work. All right, boom, we put them in the exceptions group, and we moved on, and then we circled back to them. That's how we did conditional access.